Welcome everyone to another CTC Software webinar. My name is Sean Zerbis, the Director of BIM Development here at CTC Software, and today we get to continue with the HIVE CMS Admin Learning Series focusing exclusively on processing AutoCAD content. And we're going to talk about AutoCAD and AutoCAD Civil 3D content today. So we're covering both of those topics in one session because the adding of that content is basically the same. So we're going to be taking a deep dive look at that. Now, as always, of course, these webinars are recorded. So if you want to see how to do this in the future, you can always go over to our YouTube channel, probably want to subscribe there. Take a look for the HIVE CMS Admin Learning Series playlist specifically, and that will let you see this video as soon as it's published, likely later today or sometime early tomorrow. Also, as always, for those of you who are participating with us live, I like to answer questions throughout the course of the webinar. So if you have questions about today's topic, I encourage you to throw them into the questions window and go to webinar. And of course, I also save a huge QA session for the end in case there's more questions that I can answer in line. With that, let's jump right in and take a look at today's topic. So the whole concept here is how do we get content that we need to distribute to our team into HIVE? I mean, it really is the last step in preparing our CMS before we begin to invite a lot of our users, or even maintaining the HIVE CMS after users are invited. And there's a lot of things that are really easy to add to HIVE. It's very simple. It's usually just drag and drop and you're pretty good to go if you have admin privileges. But AutoCAD and Civil 3D specifically, they've got some specialized extra controls and some extra things that you have to do special to bring that into the HIVE CMS environment. And so, in this webinar, that's what we're going to focus on, adding DWG content, tool palette content, Civil 3D styles, basically all the stuff that we can add into the HIVE CMS that's contained either as a DWG or within a DWG. So we're going to talk about some of the different AutoCAD content types that we can add. I'm going to go through and specifically process blocks and some other kind of files into the HIVE CMS. There are DWG hosted content that we're going to process in. This is where it becomes very specific to Civil 3D. We're also going to take a look at a little bit of the workflow for processing content off tool palettes. I'm not actually going to do that step today, but the process is very similar to doing DWG hosted content, which is why I'm not just going to repeat it straight out. And then ultimately, at the end of the day, we're going to talk about some key things that you want to consider in order to plan for updating and maintaining your content that's already processed into the HIVE CMS. So first off, let's take a look at some of the different content types that we can process in. Now for this, I'm going to use the CMS itself and run some searches and show you some of the content that I've already got inside my HIVE CMS so you can see some of what's already there. Now I'm going to jump over to the Home tab here, or actually let's go to the Search tab right here. And I'm going to specifically focus on some of my AutoCAD content that is from my company here, the CTC company. So if I hit apply, this should go look for everything that is stored within this library. And we're going to see a number of items here in the list. In fact, just for fun, let's see, can I show this in a better way? I guess I could list it. We'll just kind of scroll down and take a look here. So some of the things that you can store directly in the CMS would be items like the CTC Sim Express tools, the tools that exist on the ribbon. You can actually store those settings files. Like in this case, Label Genie settings files are stored inside HIVE. And if I double click on those, it'll actually load those settings direct into the tools. So while that's not truly AutoCAD content, or Civil 3D content, it definitely supports AutoCAD and Civil 3D workflows. You can see some AutoGrader styles saved inside of here as well, some pre-configured settings. You'll also see some blocks sitting inside of here. Now, some of this is actually out-of-the-box blocks, but these are some blocks that I can have, and if it happens to be a dynamic block, it will show a little lightning bolt symbol next to it, and if it happens to also be an annotative block, it'll show the little annotative symbol on the other corner down there. But that's effectively a block, just a straight up AutoCAD block. This here is another good example of another AutoCAD block, just very basic block. You can also have items that are, in fact, let's change this out for a list, because I think Now this isn't showing the styles that I thought it was. Let's pull up some details here, because this will let me see a little bit more about these objects. If I click on this primary road component right here, you can see that this is an actual assembly. This is a Civil 3D assembly, actually. Has some base data inside of here telling me what the super assemblies or sub-assemblies are inside of there, so I can see some of its makeup. But this is an assembly object, right? There's a lot of elements that can exist here. Notice a Lisp file. I can actually have a Lisp routine that I can load directly into my DWG environment, and I can have that able to be run then by me loading it directly from here. There's also plenty of other styles inside of here. BAT files can exist inside of here. I'm trying to think of some other things. PC3 settings files, CTB settings files. A lot of content can actually be placed. And in fact, if you were to expand out the AutoCAD categories filter list over here to the right, in my case, you can see pretty much everything that could potentially be added into the HIVE CMS that's AutoCAD style content or AutoCAD Civil 3D content. There is a lot of content that can be put into here, all right? So pretty much if you can use it in the AutoCAD space, you can probably throw it into the HIVE CMS. Let's just start by saying that. I'm going to switch my view back a little bit here so I can see things more the way that I'm used to. And our next step here is actually going to be to add some content, specifically by processing DWG files that themselves are blocks. So I want to process in a bunch of blocks directly into HIVE. Now I'm only going to do a couple here. I don't want to do a ton, just because each one takes, I don't know, maybe 3 seconds to scan, and we don't want to sit here watching a whole bunch of content scan while we're trying to do a presentation. But I'm going to show you how you can add this. There's 2 ways you could add this. There's an add files or folder option here where I could browse to a directory of content and add the entire folder, or I can add individual files out of a folder. That's one method. Now, I personally don't really like browsing through dialogues. Personally, for me, since I have my blocks folder already pulled up, this is some of the out-of-the-box blocks that I've actually pulled into their own directory here. What I can do with this, let me just pin HIVE to the foreground here for a moment. I can take some of this content and simply drop it into the HIVE CMS Add Content window. So just drag and drop right here. Now it's going to begin scanning this content. It's actually going to activate AutoCAD itself, and in some cases, it's even going to ask me some questions. So I have to kind of be aware that this might ask me about opening up the block in the block editor, just given what some of the objects are. And I'm going to answer no each time that happens to pop up. In fact, I can just use my keyboard to quickly arrow over on that and tell it that I don't want to directly interact with that content. But once it scans it, what it will do is add it here to my window, showing me the preview that it's going to be using. So this is just core AutoCAD block content that I can pretty much directly add into the HIVE CMS itself, and it uses just the block itself. I didn't process it yet. It just pre-scanned it to get the preview image and to know some of the information about it. It understands the path to it. It understands the AutoCAD version associated to this and the fact that it's an AutoCAD drawing category, which will effectively come in as a block. So when I double click on it, it'll load or insert the block into my active drawing session. Now, when you are processing any kind of content into the HIVE CMS, it's important that you choose a library, a destination library for this content to go. And since this is actually out-of-the-box content, I probably should have an AutoCAD OOTB folder. I don't have one for AutoCAD right now. So for just today's example, I'm just going to use AutoCAD content by me, and that's what I'm going to use for my destination directory. Now, one of the things that I was mentioning was that AutoCAD blocks and some of the AutoCAD special content has extra properties you can set. Think something similar to what you can do on tool palettes when you add AutoCAD block content or line content or items like that to a tool palette. Well, with that, we want you to have control over this as well. And so for this AutoCAD content to the far right, block by block, item by item, you have the ability to override its settings if you don't want to use the defaults. You can actually just see the little gear here. And if I click on that, what it should do is pop up a little dialog for me. It's actually scanning it right now, and it might be on a different monitor here. Oh, there it is. My block insertion settings. So again, this is very similar to what I would have inside tool palettes. So I can choose things like what units of measure I want on insert, if I wanted to ask me about scale, what scale factor by default to use, like all these basic properties that you'd be used to seeing. I could do things like working with layers inside of here. I can even generate a specific layer. If I wanted this to go to, like an auto layer, an automotive layer, then I can establish what I want those layer properties to be. So I can force this to do something very specific. If this was a dynamic block, I could actually modify the dynamic block parameters down here pre-insertion so that it defaults to the right settings. This is all just AutoCAD core block insertion settings over which I have full control in my ability to, before I even process this in, so that when my end users double click on this content, when they find it, search for it, use it, consume it, whatever, it's going to use these settings by default when dropping it into the project. So now there's another way that you can add AutoCAD block content as well. Let's remove all of this. I'm not actually going to process this right now. You can use the AutoCAD files elements in an AutoCAD DWG. Or alternatively, if, that's the command that we're going to use here. Elements in an AutoCAD DWG. I thought I saw a different option that I was going to mention as well, but that's the one that we want to use. Now, what we're going to do is browse for where I've got some of this content. Now, I do have a bunch of content in the out-of-the-box sample dynamic blocks library, and so I'm going to use some of this. So if I was to go to my Civil Imperial DWG file right here, it's one that I haven't opened up recently, so I just copied the path and I'm dropping it in here, choosing that Civil Imperial drawing. What this will do is scan that Civil Imperial drawing. It's going to look at it and find for me all of the block definitions that exist inside that file. Now, from this, I can choose any of these that I want to include. In fact, by default, they're already all included. So if there was some that I wanted to exclude, like maybe I only want a few of these guys. Let's just start with, let's do all except for this, uncheck selected, and let's grab just a couple more of these guys here, uncheck. I only want to get these few right here in the middle. So let's add these elements directly to my processing window. Once again, these are AutoCAD blocks. These blocks, these items were placed inside that DWG. They actually have a physical instance of a block inside the drawing itself. And because of that, because that physical instance is there, it's going to find it, and it will also automatically pick up, if I go over here to the properties, it's going to pick up on whatever the properties were for that. For example, that particular thing, that road intersection component that I just selected on, apparently had some kind of micro rotation. And so it's using that rotation here. Now, I actually want that rotation to default to 0. I don't want it to have anything, so I'm going to go ahead and just set that to explicitly 0. It also has some dynamic properties here, the north-south width property and the origin specific location property right there. If there was specific settings inside of there that were available, I could drop that down and use those, modify these settings for the dynamic block itself. So it's actually leveraging the dynamic properties of this element here. And again, I can override whatever else I want to about general properties here with layers, units, anything that I want. And when I save these settings, then it's going to lock those in for this particular family when it processes it. It understands it's a dynamic block here. Ultimately, if I wanted to process these into my library, I would simply click Process. Each one would be scanned. Each one would be pushed into the HIVE CMS with all of its properties, especially using these little settings going on over here. Okay, so that's core AutoCAD block content. That's the stuff that within an AutoCAD file, elements within a DWG would be block content. Pretty much all the other file types, list routines, macros, items like that, are probably going to be some kind of custom command. So I can actually just run this custom command, give a macro name, and if you've got a special command string that you want to create, man, you can put in whatever name you want, whatever macro you want, and actually have macros, just like your old toolbar buttons up here, have your macros be distributed direct through the HIVE CMS. And you can also set your own custom preview images here. The nice thing about this, as far as macros go in AutoCAD, is you don't have to make a special ribbon, a special CUIX file, distribute that in a special profile. It can just be a series of commands that you've got ready to go. Maybe those commands run list routines. Maybe they do other items. Maybe they draw something a special way, right? All those custom commands you can directly just go ahead and add into the HIVE CMS itself as well. Okay, let's talk about one of the final things here. And actually, I almost jumped ahead of my PowerPoint here because I intended to talk about processing content within DWGs, and there's one more content type within DWGs that I want to specifically mention, and that is Civil 3D content. So this is, let's go to a Civil 3D file here. I'm just gonna figure out what the path for this is. Open read-only, just so I know where it is. This is in the C3D Help Civil Tutorials folder. I'm gonna go ahead and open this thing read-only real quick, just so I can do a save as and get that path copied, because I like to cheat as much as I can and save paths. So we're gonna do a save as, save a copy of the drawing here. It should give me the default path. Oh, of course it doesn't. Why would it give me the default path there? That is fantastic. Let's try this again. Control-Shift-S. Yep, it doesn't want to give it to me. So I need to remember where that path was. Let's close this and just try that again. Close, please. Thank you. There we go. Should have had that opened up ahead of time. There we go. I'm just going to steal the path right out of here. I'm going to go browse for that specifically, and I'm going to do this through this CAD files elements in an AutoCAD DWG right here. One more time, doing the same exact command again, and I'm going to just browse for that path. So that's on my computer, C drive, program files, Autodesk, AutoCAD. I thought I had this path pre-copied to the side, but I realized as I was going to do this step that I didn't actually have that. Tutorials, drawings. Okay, so it doesn't really matter which one I grab. Just any one of these files will work fine. If I grab this alignment file as an example and open this up, it is going to scan that drawing. It's going to look for anything in that drawing. Let me actually close this out real quick here so that HIVE can get access to the background AutoCAD Civil 3D window here. Yep, there it's going, processing through. Give this thing a minute, and it's going to bring up a list of every single style and block and setting that exists in that AutoCAD file. Most notably, all of the things in the settings here in tool space. And it's taking just a little bit longer here as it scans that file. There we go. So now I have all of these components available to me at my fingertips, and I could take any of these and add them in. Now you can filter this list if you want to. Before, when I had AutoCAD elements, it was just a handful of blocks. No big deal. Now this, you can see this little tiny scroll bar right here as I'm scrolling down. There's tons of things. So if you're looking for specific items, one of the things you may want to do is either sort by name, which is the default, or sort by category so that it groups like objects together. So I can take, for example, all of my alignment stuff right here if I wanted to process all of this in and get all of it selected. What I personally like to do is start by unchecking everything and then going through and specifically checking the items that I want. So if I want these, say, survey figures to do something, I want these to be added in, I could grab those label styles and figure styles, specifically check those, and then I could eventually, after I've gone through and checked all the items that I want, I can add those elements. I like to go through and check as many as I can in one step, so I'm not waiting for this particular dialog to reload a number of times. Maybe I want all of my surface styles specifically to go in. Maybe I've got a bunch of structure styles and I want them to go in. Again, once I'm done, I can simply click Add Elements, and all of those definitions will be added here to this list when I click Process. Each of these, the blocks themselves from their drawing, and now all these standards over here, these styles will be added into my library, and they'll all become searchable. It's really that simple. You're simply going to be either adding individual files or adding elements from within a DWG. That same exact process can happen from all of your custom tool palettes. Now, I don't have a lot of really good AutoCAD custom tool palettes myself, but if I did, I could simply say elements from an AutoCAD tool palette. What you do ultimately is browse for the ATC file. Like I could go here to palettes and choose any one of these, pull all the content off of these tool palettes with all the exact same properties you've already invested some time in setting up, And all those settings then go directly to Hive. The nice thing about that is it saves you from needing to continually try to redeploy these .atc files, which, as many of you BIM and CAD managers probably understand, that can be really frustrating. This is a lot easier now to deploy content through the Hive CMS, since there's no .atcs to be pushing to multiple user computers in their profiles, nothing that needs to be refreshed. You can simply refresh your content directly in the Hive CMS, and it's immediately available to all your users, no matter where they are, whether they're attached to the network or not. So it makes this a lot easier. The process here, when I grab an ATC, it just actually consumes all that content direct to the tool palette. There's no options there. It just grabs everything off of it. And you can always remove anything from the list that you choose you don't want. So we do the intermediate dialog for DWGs because there's usually a lot of stuff in DWGs. There's usually far less content on tool palettes, so it's more sustainable to just directly load it into here and let you use it. All right, so I actually jumped ahead in my PowerPoint one more time. That was the processing tool palettes right there. You simply tell it to the tool palette file you want to process, and it'll add it to the Hive CMS window and bring all that content in. So the final thing that I want to talk about is a question that we get quite frequently from CMS admins, and that is the process of updating content. So you've added it to Hive, and now you want to make a change to the original core content, and you want Hive to know about that latest change. How does that process work? Well, I'm going to be straight up front with y'all. It's exactly the same as processing it the first time. You simply come right back here, and you process the exact same piece of content one more time with whatever the latest changes are to it. And as you process it, provided that let me make this window a little bit wider here, provided that your file path is the same as it was before, because AutoCAD uses the file path as its core identifier, as long as this stays the same, then it will automatically update the existing content that's already inside of the Hive CMS. So that's all you got to worry about. Just make sure your paths don't change. Now, if your paths do change, then what you're going to want to do is probably remove the old definition of content, whatever that might be, and update it with the latest version. Just add a new piece of content back in, add a new path, and that's going to be it. That's how you can update content inside the Hive CMS. You simply replace it with the latest edition, and that's it. So I didn't see any questions roll through while I was talking about these topics so far, and we'll be jumping into the Q&A session here in just a moment. So if you do have questions, perfect time to queue them up. But for those of you who don't like to hang out for the questions and answers period, I want to say thank you. We always appreciate when you show up live. It's more interesting for us when we get the opportunity to interact with you. If you do have questions, hopefully that makes it more interesting for you as well. Certainly when you show up live, obviously, you get to hear other people's questions as well during the QA session. With that, also, certainly we encourage you to subscribe to the YouTube channel, check out our events, make sure that you're subscribed to our newsletter so you can get notifications when upcoming webinars like this one are going live. We're doing a lot of presentations on Civil 3D, a lot of presentations on Hive lately. And so certainly this can all be valuable to your daily workflows if you can kind of catch a session that might be meaningful for you.